Poverty is not just the absence of money, but the absence of opportunity. And the United States is a country where you have both freedom and abundant opportunities. Moving to the United States has given me both. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knit family. I was the third of four children. And the best thing that my parents gave me was the gift of education. Even though I came from a poor family, they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. But what my parents did was that they instilled in us the value of faith, hard work, and not giving up. They made us realize that if you put in the work, you will definitely get the reward. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. I got my first job at the age of 14. My job was on a construction site. My duties were to move concrete on a large pan from one end of the construction site to another one. I worked on that day from around 6 in the morning to about 7 at night. At the end of the day, the employer refused to pay me. And the reason was because she did not authorize the foreman to hire me. So I worked from sunup to sundown and didn't get paid. That tore up my spirit. And from that moment on, I decided that I was going to become a lawyer. And I was going to use every ounce of strength within me to fight against injustice, regardless of how powerful the opponent is. I am a man that worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to feel like you're being unfairly treated, and I'm the person that can stand up to opponents regardless of how big or how powerful they are. Welcome to this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Olawale. Today we're going to be talking to a lawyer who has worked as both as a prosecutor and a public defender. His name is Douglas Nobles. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And for those of you watching us at home, Douglas Noble is an attorney. He has worked as both a prosecutor and a public defender. He's going to be sharing his experience with us today and how he has been able to navigate those competing sides of criminal justice system. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you please tell us more about yourself?
All right, my name's Douglas Nobles, and I am currently a prosecutor at the city attorney's office under Zach Klein. I've been there for a little over 3 years. I prosecute muni cases, so those are thefts, traffic cases. I've done some other cases as well, including DVs. And I've done that for the last 3 years. I was also a public defender for the first part of my legal career. Started off my legal career actually as a public defender law clerk. I did that for about 3 years, then became a public defender in Muni, doing the same cases I do now as a prosecutor for almost 7 years. And in between that, I was staff attorney for Judge Jameson uh, for a little bit in DR court, which is where I'm currently a candidate for. So I'm a candidate for the Common Pleas DR branch uh, here coming up this November.
Yeah, thank you. And where did you grow up?
So I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh. Then I moved home and actually worked for a workers' comp PI law firm after college as a legal assistant. And then I was kind of working there for almost 2 years, kind of thinking about what I want to do. My mom had mentioned, hey, look, you have a poli sci degree. You don't have too many options. Why not law school? So working at the law firm, and then what my mom said, I kind of said, all right, I'll check it out. So I applied to Capital University, and that's how I ended up moving down here to go to law school.
Thank you. While growing up, did you know definitely that you were going to go to college, or were you the first person to go
No.
to college in the family?
Oh, sorry. No, I wasn't the first. My mom and dad both went to college. So I was not the first. So it was an expectation in my family early on that there was no option other than going to college. My mom and dad both sacrificed very hard to send me to really good schools, me and my younger brother. So there was never a doubt that I was going to college. Now, as for becoming a lawyer, that's something I kind of fell into after college and, kind of worked my way that way. But no, I was not the first. It was definitely something that I was, you know, expected to do.
Thank you. Most attorneys will go to college and study political science with the hope of going to law school. That's the major of most attorneys. You decided to study political science without having in mind that you are going to end up being a lawyer. Why
Yeah.
political science in the first place?
Uh, I started off in accounting for a little bit, and I'm like, nah, I don't think that's going to be my thing. I've always had an interest in politics and history, and so it just kind of made sense for me to transition from my accounting business, which I did that for a year or two, to do my poli sci degree. So I've always had an interest in that. I remember being pretty young. I always liked following politics, liked history. So that's kind of how I ended up being a poli sci major. So I kind of left college, kind of unsure what I was going to do. But I think working at the law firm in between college and law school kind of helped me focus and figure out that law school is probably what I want to do.
Mm, thank you. So it's more like providence. And why did you decide to seek that position at that law firm?
It was a personal connection. So like I moved home. Um, I was working somewhere else, and then it just kind of felt it's kind of came to me. So you're right. It kind of was like providence, right? Like, hey, we're hiring. You went to high school with the guys that work at that law firm, so I kind of knew them a little bit. Why don't you come work for us?
That's awesome. And what did you do as a legal assistant, just coming straight out of college, getting your first job at a law firm? What did you do?
So I worked in the workers' comp department. So I did some of the filings for the workers' comp claims. So it was a PI workers' comp firm that did asbestos. So they did a lot of class action lawsuits. So I helped with the filing with the Bureau of Workers' Comp. So I literally just all I did was the filings that we like weekly filings. Occasionally, I would go to the hearings with some of the partners and things like that.
And working there, you say you work for a personal injury law firm doing workers' compensation and class action.
Mhm.
When exactly did you decide that you're so impressed with what you've seen that you're going to be a lawyer yourself?
Well, I think working there and working around other guys are either who were lawyers or who were in law school, I realized, hey, you know what, this is probably the next step for me, which made sense, right? I was a poli sci major. I'm working at a workers' comp firm, so it just kind of made sense for me to law school was my next step. So it wasn't like a light bulb moment where like, hey, look, I want to be a lawyer. It just made sense logically that if I wanted to keep moving forward in my career, that was the next thing to do.
Was there any attorney or person that motivated you or inspired you that you're like, yeah, yeah, I want to be like that attorney?
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but the partner at the law firm I worked at there kind of gave me the idea of applying to Capital. I think he knew some people who applied and went to Capital, and I never forget. Um, Before I started applying to schools, he walked by me in the hallways like, "Hey, look, I got an idea. Why don't you apply to Capital?" So again, Providence, right? He kind of told me to do that out of nowhere, and he kept walking by me, and I applied to Capital, and 16 years later, I'm here in Columbus.
Did you go to Capitol as a full-time student or were you an evening student?
No, I was an evening student, so
Okay.
which was different because there was a few of us, but I was a young evening student. Most evening students were working, usually in their 30s. I was probably the second or third youngest in my class. So that was a transition, right? To be the youngest and work with people who already had families and jobs, and I'm 25 years old or whatever. Um, and I had to find a job to work uh, while I was going to school at night. So I started working at first. I did Target for like about a month, and then I ended up working FedEx night shift, loading trucks.
Yeah. Even though you claim to be the youngest when you were in law school, the kind of lifestyle you lead is just like those that were there that were older than you, because most people that goes to night school or night law school or evening classes, they're people that have traditional jobs during the day. So
Hmm.
then the only time they have for school is at night.
Yeah,
So you are 25 years old, but your lifestyle is like that. There's someone who is in their 40s or 50s or with family. So what
yeah.
was that like for you, having to be that non-traditional student and young, but then living the life of people 10, 15, 20 years older?
It was tough because since I worked night shifts, I worked like 2:30 to 8:30 every night. And I had a roommate who was a year older than me at Capitol. And on Friday nights, I had to work. Friday night was my last day of the week, so I worked 2:30 basically Saturday morning. And he would come home after being out partying and laughing. He would laugh at me like, "You got to go to work." I'm going out partying. I'm like, "Yeah, I got to go to work." So it was funny and a little bit strange, sometimes frustrating that I had to work that shift while the rest of the people that I knew who were younger and like the day students were living more like a college lifestyle, where I was living, like you said, a more non-traditional, older person lifestyle.
Yeah, I can relate. That's how law school was for me.
Yeah, it was different. Looking back on it, I'm glad I did it, but in the moment, it was very frustrating, a little bit, and also my sleep was messed up because I would work 2:30 to 8:30, sleep for 4 hours, study, go to class, and then sleep again after class to go, and get up at 2 o'clock to go to work
Yeah, you become an adult and very responsible very quickly.
really
You'll
quick.
be you'll be like 10 years older than your peers.
Yeah, very tired and very kind of like ready to find something else.
Yes. And in your second year of law school, finally you got a job that is related to law. Can you
Mhm.
tell us about that?
Yeah, so the same roommate who would kind of joke with me about partying, he was actually working uh, for the public defenders as a law clerk in common pleas, which is so they do felonies in common pleas. And he came to me one day and was like, "Hey, look, we need some more clerks. I know you don't like working at FedEx. Do you want to come work at the public defender's office?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. Like, where can I sign up?" So I started a job actually late second semester, first year at the public defender's office as a law clerk. It was very exciting to go back to a normal 9 to 5 job.
Thank you. And what did you do as a law clerk?
So as a felony law clerk, we were responsible for felony arraignments. So felony arraignments and common pleas are Monday, Wednesday, Friday at the time. During the afternoons, 11 ish to 1:30, we would have to do arraignments. So we would interview the people in custody, and we would get paperwork. We would tell them their rights or help them answer. We would help them with their questions, and then we would kind of help prepare arraignments for the attorneys. We also did some legal research and writing. We answered jail calls, which is 3 days a week, which is a lot of our job. People call from jail with questions, we would answer that.
Now, did you feel like a lawyer at that time? Because now this is your second foray into working for a law firm, but it just happens that you're working for the government.
Yeah, a little bit, but really, I really felt like a law clerk, right? Because I did a lot of law clerk things. You did a lot of filing, you did a lot of copying, you answered questions for the people in jail. You went down to the jail cells to kind of meet people and talk to people, and there were some crazy things down there. Just you're dealing with a tank full of like 20 to 25 guys, answering questions and passing out paperwork, and they would play games with you. They would hide the pen. It was a pretty a different kind of experience. So I didn't really feel like a lawyer. I felt like a law clerk, honestly. It was
So,
not
and,
glamorous.
and in spite of that experience after law school, you still decided to stay with the public defender's office as
Yeah.
an attorney. What prompted that decision?
Well, it's funny I never thought I would ever um, would do criminal law, but it's a exciting, fun thing, right? So it's like never the same, right? It's every day there's a new story, and it's a very exciting thing. So I think being there as a law clerk, seeing the other lawyers work, you kind of you kind of see yourself doing that, right? Because you do get to make some change, right? And after doing that work for as a law clerk for a couple of years, you're like, there's no way I could sit in the office and just research and write. Like, I got to be in the courtroom. I have to be out there doing stuff. I have to be talking to clients and stuff like that.
Thank you. And if you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast in the audio format, I'm talking to Douglas Nobles. He's an attorney who has worked both as a public defender and as a prosecutor. And we're talking about defending and prosecuting criminal cases, and he's giving us his angle. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in a minute. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, comment, if you want to anything to, if you have any question or comment, you can always send emails to info@noblesforjudge.com. Welcome back to Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale. And the guest today is Douglas Nobles. He's a prosecutor and a public defender. So, after you graduated law school, you stayed with the public defender's office
Mhm.
as an attorney. What was that like as a young attorney working as a public defender?
It is very, it can be very, it's very busy, right? So the average public defender, at least here in Franklin County, probably carries a daily docket of 10 to 15 cases. Now, granted, some of these cases are just traffic cases and they don't involve a lot of legal issues, but still, just the volume, right? We have 14 judges in this county. So you have a lot of different judges, a lot of different prosecutors, a very heavy docket. So when you first start off, it's very intimidating and it's very hard to pick up because you have to know criminal law, rules of evidence, traffic law, BMV issues because your clients may not have a license, and you have to understand the point system. You have to understand how to get somebody a valid license if they don't have one. You got to understand all these issues, and they do train you pretty well. I mean, they give you 90 days to 120 days of training, but it takes a lot of information to kind of put together, and you have a lot of volume. So as you go in as a new attorney, your first couple of weeks, you're like, this is crazy. I'm dealing with 10 to 15 people a day. And then you have to go back to your office and take calls and organize for the next day. So, I mean, it's a tough job and it's a thankless job, right? Because your clients never truly, understand or thank you. They kind of, which is understandable because they're under a lot of stress. So they never really, you know, kind of give you that thanks or give you that like, hey, thanks a lot, Doug, for helping me out.
And doing a job like that where you put in all your efforts, and you want the best outcome for people, and at the end of the day, they didn't even think you did anything. How
Yeah.
did that make you feel as a person?
I mean, it's tough because as a public defender, I think it's kind of expected, and I think they train you on that a little bit. Hey, look, people come in at their lowest moment; they're very stressed out, and there's a lot going on outside the courtroom. So I think as a public defender, if you realize early on that it's not personal, and that person maybe took an hour and a half to get down here, they had issues at home, so when they come in court, they're very stressed and very scared. If you understand it early on, then you kind of get over the fact that that person was a little rude to me, or they didn't. It's not like you're looking for things, but you do a lot of work for people, and then just kind of walk away, or they're mad when you do all this work. It's not exactly what they want. So you kind of have to realize it's not personal, and kind of look outside of that and realize you're helping that person out. You're doing the best you can, and you understand that they have a lot going on. So that really helped over time to kind of understand that. So it kind of brought down that feeling of like, wow, I spent an hour researching this, and that person yelled at me because of whatever. And over time, you're like, I get it. The person's stressed out. The person's worried about what's going on at home.
And did you have to try, and did you have to take cases to trial?
Yeah. Like I forget the stat, but something like 98 or 99% of the cases don't go to trial, which you definitely know. We have so much volume in Franklin County that it's very hard. It's hard to go to trial, if that makes sense. Judges are really trial versed because their dockets are so large, and prosecutors are the same way, and public defenders are the same way. So I have taken cases to trial when, hey, look, you have a client sitting in jail, and either the person doesn't want to plead guilty or it's clear the person didn't do what they're accused of. So yes, you have to take things to trial. But the vast majority of what a public defender does is kind of guide the person through the system, make sure their rights aren't being trampled, and make sure that they get the best from their public defender. So a lot of times things are played out for a number of reasons, but ultimately we don't go to trial too often.
Can you tell us about your first trial experience?
So
What
my
it was
first,
like, how you felt?
yeah. So my first trial experience probably happened within the first 6 months of being a public defender, um, and it kind of popped up on you, which you probably have had that before, right? Because we often joke as lawyers, as trial lawyers, is that the ones you prepare for never go to trial, right? It's always the one that you didn't prepare for, or you thought the guy was going to plea. um, so I'll never forget. It was a OVI. We had a plea agreement or plea offer that my client wanted to take for months, and we come in and he tells me first thing in the morning, "I'm not pleading." And I'm like, "Wait a second! I thought we had a long conversation. You came to my office, you watched the video, you admitted you were impaired." He's like, "I'm not pleading. I don't want to plead." I talked to my mama and she said, "Don't plead." And I'm like, okay, all right. So I was hoping if I just let him sit there for a minute and think about it, he would change his mind. 12:30, 1 o'clock, I'm not pleading. And that's when the judge is like, "Mr. Nobles, what are we doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess we're going to trial." And I hadn't prepared it because it was one of my 12 cases. And he told me like 3 days earlier, "I'm pleading. I want to be done." So I had to sit down in the back and figure it out, right? So fortunately, our office has what they call group leaders. So we have people who are kind of like our supervisors who are around. I went to my group leader and said, "Hey, look, looks like I'm going to trial. I need help." And I remember that, and he just kind of said, "Okay." So we just plowed through it. He sat first, and I sat second chair because again I had been there for 6 months. It was very intimidating and very kind of scary because I, you know, it was my first trial, and so that I'll never forget that sitting down. Uh, we were picking the jury and all this stuff, and it was definitely a different experience.
Thank you, but you learned from it.
I did, and then the next trial I had was like a week later. Uh, that involved interpreters, and it was a mess. And I remember having to cross-examine a victim through an interpreter. It took 4 hours to do two witnesses, and I'm like, is this how it is every month? So I had two really good experiences the first time. It took away a lot of the fear of having a trial, because once you do a few of them, it does go away.
Yeah, it's like riding a bicycle.
It is, yeah.
Some people don't trust public defenders, because they believe that because they will also work for the government, then
Mhm.
they work in tandem with the prosecutor's office. So, how do you handle people like that who happens to be your client?
Yeah, and that happens. Unfortunately, happens quite a lot. They call us public pretenders. So you have to gain trust early on. And I think what I tell people now who are younger public defenders before I left becoming a prosecutor is if you go out with talk to your client and you show them that you're working for them and that you know the case, that goes away. I think what happens is in the past for some people, they've had public defenders that didn't know the case or weren't prepared. So they felt like they weren't getting the fair uh, a fair shake at it, right? So I learned early on, if I go out and talk to my client, say, look, I watched the video, I found discovery, this is the issue, this is my opinion, this is what I think I can do. It does help with that feeling of you're working with the government, right? So that's the biggest thing, is show them that you're working, know your case. And a lot of times they go, okay, Doug's working for me. He knows he knows what he's doing, and he's not um, trying to make me plead. That's another thing too. I learned over time is give your client options, tell them your opinion, but don't force them to plead, or don't put pressure on them to plead. And that takes away that feeling of you're out here just to put me in jail. You're out here helping out the judge, and you're helping out the prosecutor.
And how did you manage client expectations?
It's another thing I learned over time is be honest, right? Um, as a public defender, or as any lawyer that does this kind of jobs, you got to come out and say, again, if you're prepared, you know the case. You can say, hey, look, Mr. Smith, I watched the video. You did X. I have a video from Kroger, and I have you walking out without paying. I think this is a case that you might have to plead. Um, and I, when you're younger, and I've noticed this as a prosecutor who switched over now, who's dealing with younger public defenders, if you don't manage that early on for your client, then it comes back to kind of bite you, right? Because you have to recognize the case, recognize the strengths, its weaknesses, and be honest with your client. And don't oversell, right? And don't undersell. Just be honest. Because if you oversell, I get this case dismissed, and you can't, but you still are getting a good deal, then that doesn't work, right?
So sometimes every attorney has to deal with difficult clients. And if you work as a public defender, when the people that you're working for are not even the one that hired you, so you're more highly likely to have more difficult clients. How do you handle such situations?
That's one thing we always used to say is we can't and we don't pick our clients. As a private attorney, you get to choose who you want to represent. You get to choose the cases that you want to take. So you can look at the evidence and say, I don't want to take that case. So I didn't have that option. You have to build the trust. You have to be transparent. You have to be open. You have to call people back. You have to listen. So the biggest thing I kind of learned early on too is if you listen to your clients and let them vent and trying to build trust that way, then often the people who are difficult early on kind of start realizing that, hey, I'm here to help you, you know. So listening really helps with dealing with difficult clients. It really just kind of makes them realize like he's listening to me, he's listening to my issues, so I'm gonna trust him. And sometimes too, it just doesn't work. And that happens a lot. And because we had 37 attorneys in the office, you might have to bring someone else in and like, hey, look, me and Mr. Smith are just not getting along. We just don't see eye to eye. I'm gonna get help from my coworker, bring him or her in to see if they can kind of help me out. So we kind of worked as a team, and sometimes a different voice and a different perspective did help.
Thank you. And if you're watching this show, we're talking about defending and prosecuting criminal cases, a lawyer's angle. And I'm talking to attorney Douglas Nobles, who has worked both as a prosecutor and as a public defender. We'll take a short break, and by the time we come back, we'll talk about his experience as a prosecutor. He's been talking about his experiences as a public defender. Stay tuned and don't go away. Just know that when you're coming through the door, you're in a place where you will be accepted and welcome as family, where you'll be seen as a person. The goal is to make sure that our clients will leave feeling that someone gets them. At the Olawale Law Firm, we get you. We understand you. Trust us. Welcome back. I'm still talking to attorney Douglas Nobles. Now, tell us what made you switch
to the other side, the prosecutor's office?
Yeah, that was a tough decision. So after about 7 years, I decided to switch. The city attorney switched at the same time, and attorney Zach Klein, who is now uh, the the attorney for the city, was really into criminal justice reform. He had some very good policies that I liked. So I felt like, you know what, it might not be a bad time for me to consider switching. I felt sometimes a public defender, and I like being a public defender, is you're very reactive. So you're kind of dealing with what's thrown at you. So if it's a certain case, the prosecutor dealing with, the judge, and I felt like the change that you really want to make in the criminal justice system is very hard from the public defender side because you're reacting to everything. So I realized after a year or so of Zach Klein being in office and some of the things that they were trying to do, there was probably a good place for me to try to be a prosecutor. So as a prosecutor, I felt like it's more proactive, right? So if you want to make change as a prosecutor, you can do it. It's much easier, right? So if I see a case where there's no probable cause, or a case where I think there's some issues, then I have the ability to go to my boss and say, hey, look, this case is not, I don't think we should prosecute this case. Also, as a prosecutor, over the last 3 years, I'm able to help train new prosecutors and do some training with the police. So, again, you have more of a voice to kind of voice some of the things that you see that is wrong in the system. And, so I think that's why I switched over, and it's been great the last 3 years. And I think it's a lot easier to make change from the prosecutor side than it is from the public defender side.
Yeah. So having worked as a public defender, and you mentioned that you are always defending, so you're always reacting. So now that you become a prosecutor, you believe that you can effect more change. What happens to people that says that defending those cases too, it's a way to effect change to keep prosecutors in check?
I mean, that's a good question, and I totally believe that, right? Because the public defender's job is to press against the state, right? The idea is that you're defending your client against the state, and you can do that. However, it all depends on the prosecutor you're dealing with. It all depends on the courtroom you're in, and I feel like doing both sides, the change on, and I'm not saying you can't make change from both sides. It felt like for me it was a little easier or more, a little more clear from the prosecutor side because then you can change the policy, right? So as a prosecutor in theory and in practice, depending on where you're working, you can really change or affect change from that side. If you see an issue that doesn't seem right, you can always reach out to the person or reach out to reach out to your boss. Say, hey, look, I've noticed that these things I'm seeing. We're prosecuting these cases rather than maybe asking for jail or a fine. Maybe we ask for some kind of help. Right. That's one thing that we do a lot in our office is we try to connect people to resources. And we have 4 different specialty dockets in Franklin County, actually 5. So as a prosecutor, rather than saying, hey, look, I want this person to go to jail, why not see if they're eligible for one of our dockets where we can get them connected to help? As a public defender, no matter how hard I press a prosecutor for that, that prosecutor may feel like I don't think this person is appropriate for drug court. So I'm not going to say I'm going to do that. So that's where the change kind of stops sometimes, right?
So prosecutors has more power in the fact that they can decide to dismiss cases. They can decide to make recommendations for diversion. A public defender doesn't have that power. They can ask, they can request, they can beg, but
Yes.
the prosecutor has to say. So if you want the case to be dismissed, you're gonna have to fight for it.
Yes. Yes. And that's something that gets real frustrating because remember, you're dealing with different prosecutors every day. So there is a policy for the office overall. Overall policy for every office, but each individual prosecutor may feel differently about each case. And I remember as a public defender, there was several times where I'm like, please, this is a good person. This person made a mistake. This person has this drug issue. They really need help. Doing 30 days in jail isn't the answer. Can we do drug court? And the person's like, no. And no matter how much you beg, no matter how much you fight, and at a certain point, you just kind of waste your time and make things worse. So, but as a prosecutor, I feel you can make that change because you can decide, hey, look, based on the record, based on the crime, I think drug court is appropriate for this person. And jail may not be appropriate.
As a public defender, having to go through that most of the time, how did that make you feel?
It can be very frustrating because you feel like you're running up against a wall every day. And there are sometimes public defender where you're running up against the prosecutor, your client, and the judge. So it's you versus three people some days. And there's days where it can be very frustrating and where you can't, it's just a fight with everyone. You're fighting with your client, not fighting, but you're disagreeing or like with your client. And then you're walking to the courtroom, the prosecutors, you're disagreeing with that person. So it's a constant wall, it feels like. And you have days or weeks where every case is like that, As a prosecutor, I don't necessarily feel that way, because again, you're dictating to a certain degree what's going on in that courtroom. So, and I told some of my public defender friends, like, hey, as a prosecutor, I got one or two things to worry about. You have like five, and that does sometimes it kind of burns you out as a public defender because if you got 15 people on a Tuesday and you're not fighting, but you're disagreeing or arguing with five different prosecutors and five different judges, it can wear you out.
Yeah, so the public defender is a battle of emotion, it's a mental battle.
Yes.
So how did you handle that mental aspect of it? Because you're not a robot, you have feelings.
Yeah, it's tough. Some public defenders struggle with it and they kind of burn out. I learned from training and some people who were at the office who were older than me that you got to kind of depersonalize from it and realize it's not personal. You have to do the best you can. If you do the best you can and work hard, no matter what happens, that's what you know that you did, right? So you won't take it home with you. And there are people who did take a lot of it home with them, right? Because you feel really personal. So you learn how to say, look, I'm doing my job. I filed discovery. I read the case. I worked hard. So if I didn't get the result my client needed, that's all I can say. I did the best I could do. So it does get tough, but if you learn early on to kind of depersonalize and do the best you can, then it helps take away that draining feeling every day of like, I didn't get my client what he wanted or what she wanted, but I did the best I can.
You decide to recalibrate what success means. Success means you putting in your best efforts.
Yes.
And regardless of what you do, the outcome wouldn't matter as long as you put in your best effort.
Yes. I think that's the biggest thing I learned. And even as a prosecutor, there's times where things don't go the way you want. As long as you did try your best, put the work in, that's how you can go home every night and say, look, I did the best I can. And you're always going to have cases on both sides where you really feel personal and it feels like you didn't do enough. But if you learn that early on in your career, I think it really helps take away some of that feeling every day of I'm burned out or my client didn't get what they needed and they were crying when they left the court. Because it's very emotional. I've had clients arrested in court and their kids are sitting there and they had to call somebody to come pick their kids up. I've had a lot of, really not crazy, but just really tough things to kind of deal with when you're trying to do the best you can. And the judge is like, I'm going to take her client into custody and their 5-year-old daughter's crying in the hallway because daddy's going to jail.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And what was the transition like for you when you became a prosecutor?
It was different because, I was a public defender so long, and I tell people now I'm still a public defender at heart to a certain degree. I was a public defender for 7 years almost, or 7 years. And I've been a prosecutor for 3, so almost twice as long. So you have to readjust the expectations and what your goals are. So as a public defender, you have one client. That's your client. As a prosecutor, you have the state, and you have victims. That was something that was tough to kind of transition. That I have I'm the state, or we represent the state, but I also represent the victim, right? So sometimes they don't overlap, or they don't agree. So that was tough to kind of figure out, is how do I make sure my victims are getting what they need, but then also as a prosecutor, I'm doing my job as a prosecutor.
So now that you're a prosecutor, do you feel that you've been able to effect more change using that pro power instead of the, con power?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've tried to do a good job of, when I see injustice or see something, then I try to call it out. And I've tried to go and tell people, hey, look, this is an issue here, or maybe we should consider some kind of resource rather than jail. So I feel like I've tried to do a really good job the last few years on trying to call out the injustice when I see it, because you got to read the reports and go over it and realize that, hey, there may not be probable cause here. There may not be a crime committed here, or they may have the wrong person. Or so I've tried to do that. I think the best way is calling out, letting the appropriate person know, or telling the officer, whoever, hey, look, I noticed this. Could you explain it? Yeah, I think the probable cause might be missing here, and maybe we can talk about it, which kind of helps them out too. A lot of times, like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. You know.
So you became like the voice of reason because you are able to see things from the other side. If you
Yes.
are a public defender that a career prosecutor will miss.
Yes, and I think that's why I do have a pretty different experience, because I've done both sides now, and you see both sides, right? As a public defender, it's one client. It's pretty like, this is my client. This is all I want to do. As a prosecutor, you have a much broader view of things. So I've learned that your victims are really important, right? So there's a victim on a lot of these crimes that needs to be heard. And as a public defender, you don't think about that. As a public defender, it's your client. So if your client commits a crime of violence against a victim, you're just trying to make sure your client is given the rights that they are afforded under the Constitution. As a prosecutor, you have a victim now that may have been hurt, and maybe hurt in the future by this person. And you have to think about that. You think about what's the appropriate action or penalty or punishment to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Now that you're working as a prosecutor, did it give you a better understanding of of prosecutors? I mean, of when you were a public defender, I'm sure you were not able to understand where prosecutors were coming from. So, do you have a better understanding now?
Yes, and it goes back to that victim, or the fact that there's a person on the other side of the crime, or the and that's the part of public defender you don't see, because you're not supposed to, right? Because you're supposed to help your client. So you have a duty to your client to zealously represent that client. So now I kind of have a different perspective of, like, yeah, I get the job of the public defenders and stuff, but also there's a victim that we need to consider as the state, who may be really hurt, right? And it's not just crimes of violence; it's property crime, which we see a lot of lately. Um, where, hey, look, their car was damaged, they're out $1,000. We have to make sure that person's made whole. We have to make sure that person's compensated for what happened. So it does change your perspective uh, on how you view these things, as opposed to, as public defender, is a little more narrow because you have one client.
Did working as a public defender help in any way the way you prosecute cases?
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned, or I think helped, is the empathy part, right? Because as a public defender, you get to know your clients pretty well. And even though they're accused of some pretty serious things, you realize that they're people, and they have a lot of, and they may be going through a lot. So it kind of gives me empathy when I see things. I understand, as a public defender, one thing, big difference between public defender and prosecutor is, I understood the resources that were out there to help people, because the public defender, you're trying to connect your clients to drug court or mental health court or vets court, right? So I know, as a prosecutor now, that if somebody comes in and they're accused of theft from Kroger and they're stealing food, it's because they're most likely have an issue with they need food, or they need housing, or they have a drug issue. So when I see that, I'm more empathetic to, like, hey, rather than jail, maybe we should consider trying to connect them to resources. Maybe we should get them to drug court, because they're stealing because they're trying to buy drugs and they need to sell it. So it's giving me a more of an empathetic view. I think some prosecutors who haven't done the other side don't necessarily have, because they never talk to people like that, and they never got to learn their story.
Thank you. And if you're still watching, I'm talking to Douglas Nobles. He's an attorney who has worked both sides of the criminal justice system as a public defender and as a prosecutor. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back.
Just know that when you're coming through the door, you're coming in through a place where you will be accepted and welcome as family, where you'll be seen as a person. The goal is to make sure that our clients will leave feeling that someone gets them. At the Olawale Law Firm, we get you. We understand you. Trust us.
Welcome back, Douglas. So now that you are the prosecutor, the person in power, just like you said, who has more power to effect change, what are the kind of cases you prosecute?
So I prosecute in Muni Court in Franklin County. It's thefts, uh, OVIs, assaults, um, minor drug cases. Not too many of those anymore. I did some DV cases for a couple months last year. Those kind of cases, right? So like the lower level cases. So those are the cases I've done both as a public defender and as a prosecutor.
No, so I didn't work both sides of the coin, which is as a prosecutor and a public defender. Does it affect you going against some of your prior colleagues?
At first, it was awkward because I remember I left the public defender's office on like a Wednesday. I started at the prosecutor's office on a Thursday, so I don't know why I did that. I should have probably had a weekend or weekend in between, but it was odd. One day I was with them, next day I wasn't. So it was strange for about a year or so. Just kind of now trying to be, because it's an adversarial system, right? So you're supposed to, not agree. So you're like, those are your friends, But over time, though, over time it kind of went away. And as the public defender's office got new people, they didn't even know I was a public defender. So by now, 3 years out, I would say half the office that never worked with me.
What advice will you have for a young person who is considering either becoming a prosecutor or public defender?
Advice wise, I think I'll go back to you gotta learn how to take it in stride, right? It's a really good job and a good place to be. I think being in court, after being in court for so long now, is a great place. You gotta learn how to not take it personal. And if you put the work in and if you know your case, you will really enjoy it and it'll be a great job. And you gotta understand that ultimately, especially as a public defender, it's a people person job, and so is being a prosecutor, right? You gotta like people because you spend every day, all day working with people, talking to people, and you gotta be able to learn how to build relationships. And I think it's a really important thing as an attorney, especially in the criminal law, that you got to get along with people because that's how you get things done, and that's how you help your clients. That's how you help your victims, and that's how you make it through the courts by building relationships, working hard, and doing the best you can for your clients or your victims or for the state.
Yeah. So when you talk about building relationships, are you talking about if you're a prosecutor, build a relationship with defense bar, or if you're a public defender, build a relationship with the prosecutor's bar?
Maybe not. I think the idea is that since it's such a small group of people, you got to learn that it's not personal. So if you don't agree with someone, you can't make it personal. So I mean by building relationships that way, right? So if you don't agree with the prosecutor today, you can't make it about him or you. It's about your client, or for him, it's about their victim, but don't make it personal. Don't make it like I'm mad at Doug or I'm mad at Tom because they didn't give me what I wanted. That's what I mean, right? Because we see each other so often, and it's a relatively small bar. And you got to remember, you're there to help your client out. So you have to understand that you got to deal with that prosecutor or that public defender probably the next day or like the next week. And the same thing with the judge too. You have to deal with that judge multiple times a week. So you have to understand that it's a people person job, and you have to learn to kind of, like I said earlier, depersonalize and just do your work and don't make it personal. Understand that you got to deal with that. You have to deal with these people probably 4 or 5 times a month.
Thank you. And you're currently running for judge of the Court of Common Pleas, the Domestic Division.
Correct.
Why switch from being working within the criminal justice system to the domestic court, which deals with divorces, family law cases, custody, and things like that,
Well,
diverging from your experience as an attorney?
Well, I was a staff attorney for Judge Jameson over in that court. So, ironically, that's the seat I'm running for. So, I do have some experience as staff attorney. I did that for a little bit. I went public defender, staff attorney, public defender, then prosecutor. So, I have experience. I like the court. I think there are things I learned as a public defender and prosecutor that I can use in that court. Ultimately, I think since that court deals with a lot of juvenile issues and family law issues, that I can use what I've learned in that court, and I spent time there, so I do have some experience over there.
Thank you. Do you think any experiences that you had in the past personally will aid you in being an effective judge?
Well, I think my career, like we talked about, of doing both sides gives me that viewpoint that a lot of people don't have necessarily. I get the issues that are affecting people who are in front of us. If I would win, that, like I said earlier, that there are a lot of stuff going on outside the courtroom, and a lot of times we have to address the underlying issues, and that's how we can help people, right? And I also understand as a prosecutor that, again, it's not just about the person in front of you. There's victims, there's family members, there's the public. So I understand both sides of it, and how do you balance that side, right? To make sure that we're meeting the needs of the public and the victims, and we're meeting the needs of the person who is in front of us.
When you imagine yourself on the bench as a judge of the Court of Domestic Court in Franklin County, what kind of judge do you visualize yourself?
So one thing I've learned dealing with judges is you have to be consistent, you have to be fair, and I think empathy is an important thing too, right? Because empathy goes for both victims and the persons in front of you. You have to listen, you have to be open, you have to be flexible. Too often, sometimes I think judges can be a little inflexible a little bit. I think flexibility and understanding the resources that are available to you is also very important, right? Because the judge, you want to connect resources to everyone. And in that court, especially because you're dealing with not just the children, you're dealing with their families. You know, make sure that, because if the family issues aren't addressed, then that child's going to probably come back to your court. So I think that's how I envision myself: fair, consistent, and being pretty understanding of both sides, since I've done both sides.
And your opponent is someone who has been on that bench for over 2 decades. What do you have to say to voters who are thinking, or who might say that she's been there longer and you are this new face? How do you distinguish yourself?
Well, like I said, I think my unique experience as a public defender, as a prosecutor, as a staff attorney in that court, as a law clerk, going back to my early days as a law clerk in common pleas, talking, doing felony research. So I have a significant legal history and career that actually I've worked in every court. I've worked in muni, I've worked in common pleas, I've worked in domestic relations. So my experience as prosecutor and public defender gives me a pretty unique experience. So I may not have the experience that she does of 2 decades in that court, but I have a lot of experience in all the courts. In general, I think together that makes me a pretty good candidate.
And since you're seeking to become a judge, do you have either a retired judge or a sitting judge that inspires you or that you would like to emulate?
So I think one thing as a public defender is you get to know all the judges, here in Franklin County. So, and I still talk to a lot of judges, and I throw ideas off of them. And I talk to them. So, I would say one particularly, but I think there's a group of judges that I kind of go to and talk to, because as a public defender, you have to deal with all of them. So you got to know all of them pretty well. So I think one thing I've learned though from the group of judges I like to talk to is you got to be fair and you got to be consistent. And I think you would know when judges aren't consistent and aren't fair, it's very hard to practice in the courtroom. So that's kind of what I want to do as a judge is be consistent, fair, and understand both sides.
Thank you. And you're married and you have two young boys.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Now,
sorry.
yes. And you have two young boys. So how was the campaign been like with the boys and your wife?
So far, it's good, but it's early. It's only March. I kind of trying to involve the boys. I took my youngest to a breakfast last week. My oldest kind of understands what I'm doing, and he's pretty interested. So, as we move along here, I'm gonna start taking to more events so they can kind of know what we're doing. My my wife's been really great. She's very helpful, and she's totally into it, and she's helped me out with my campaign. So far so good, but I recognize it's early. And I recognize we got a long way to go and a really busy summer.
And what was family life like doing the kind of work you do?
Um, I mean, it was. I mean, it's pretty busy. One thing is working for as a part defender or prosecutor. There isn't a lot of late weekend stuff to do, so I was pretty free to be, pretty active with my kids. I coached my oldest in flag football last fall, which is great. Both my kids are really into sports, so I think that's been a pretty good thing working as a prosecutor and public defender, as I do have the time to do things with my family.
You said you coached your older son's flag football last year. Was that because you played football in the past?
Yeah, I play high school football, and it was one of those things where I was kind of like they sent an email out saying that they needed help coaching, and I became the head coach. So I kind of bit off more than I could chew for a minute, but it ended up being a great season, a lot of fun. I learned a lot on how to coach 9-year-old boys. Um, so it was a great time. Hopefully, maybe I don't know. This year might be a little busy. I'm hoping I can find a way to try to do it again this fall.
Thank you. And for people who wants to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
You can email me at info@nobles.judge.com, and my website is noblesforjudge.com.
Thank you. And thank you for coming on to Legal Angle. It's been wonderful talking to you for all this time and answering all those questions and telling us about your life as a prosecutor and a public defender.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And for those of you either watching or listening to this program, thank you. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your attention. And until next time, tune in for another wonderful episode, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.